Hi everyone, this is Contrary, and we are back with more A Case of Distrust. This is the second part of the free demo before the game releases on the 8th of February. So if you watched last time, you might remember that our first client was a stray cat who was very hungry, and we had to search our apartment in order to solve this difficult case of where is all of the cat food. Hopefully we get something more involved this time. We did have some sleazy guy named Green show up and harass us into listening to his problems, so let's see what happens with that. So, Connor Green had just given me a case that involved his bootlegging. I still wasn't sure if he'd be worth my time. I decided to head to Southern Coffee and consult with Frankie. Ooh, new character. I turned back to the apartment, still confused about the whole story. My headache wasn't helping either. Whenever I lacked clarity, a trip to Southern Coffee was usually the cure. I don't need to check any of this again. We've already looked at all of that, so let's just head straight out the door. I'd mounted a gold plate on the outside that read P.C. Malone, Private Investigator. Let's leave. There was only one place I needed to go to clear my head. Southern Coffee. Let's check it out. Southern Coffee was a basement dive. It wasn't modern, hip, or ever busy. And it was my favourite place to down some paint, especially in the company of the best bartender in the city. Go here. Let's do it. I gave my address and slouched in the back seat of the taxi cab. I thought a good way to pass the journey might be to chat with the driver. Sure, why not? Let's do it. He was young, not a teenager, but not far off. The redness in his face and a mean scowl told me he was angry. Don't much like driving taxicabs, I offered. He looked quizzically at me as though He looked quizzically at me through the rear view before understanding what I meant. No, lady, I like it right enough. Just some bozo for you were in here was giving me hell because I look like the boy his daughter's going with. Went off about how my generation was ruining America. That scumbag didn't know jack. It sounds like you know. I wasn't much interested. You never know what might be useful information, you know? The more you know. It sounds like you know more, I asked. I'm no genius, he replied, but you talk to anyone from the last century, they'll tear your ear off for just being young. How'd they get so high, I wonder? Given the world in the 1890s, like a smooth-running roadster, then what did they do? Bash it on every curb in sight, their greed, their war, their politics. Now they give us a ruined clunker and they're mad at our manners when we grab the keys. I agreed, it's always the same. The Great War was the hardest fought, at home and abroad, I said. The old men who put us there had some nerve. He replied hotly, and after those years, they tell us to get in line. It's a bum deal to me, sister. We're in the information age and the news of the world is crap. They're just angry we can see their folly. You see what they're setting up here, that the 1920s isn't so different to now? The taxicab rolled to a stop. Anyhow, the driver said, thanks for letting me blow off steam. Have a nice day, miss. I opened the car door and stepped out. Well, that was some nice world building, but I don't actually think it led to any useful information for us. Who knows? Southern Coffee was an automat diner. Ethel Burgess, the lone waitress, was friendly to help with any inquiry. Of course, if you winked at her right, she'd show you the way to the downstairs toilet where Frankie played bathroom attendant. Southern Coffee had the distinct feeling of home. The familiar smell of mold in that old basement was enough to put a grin on my face. Is this Frankie? Some booze? Well, that's right out here on the counter. Or have we already gone downstairs? We must have gone downstairs. Okay. Frankie tended bar at Southern Coffee. Though it wasn't his place, I'd never caught a whiff of the real owners. They trusted Frankie to do what he did best. What have you got to say, Frankie? I said, "Lo, Frankie," and was met with a smile and a grunt from Franklin Ernest Conway. He was a big fella. He'd been a decent picture. He was a fantastic orator. Elaborate, please. But he was a fantastic orator, but knew when to be a good ear, too. For my money, there hadn't ever been, nor will there ever be, a more loyal barman. I sat at the bar. "You got the spooks, PC?" he asked. "You're worn as a catcher's mitt." I suppose my exhaustion showed. "I won $100 for nothing, and I can't let it go." I told Frankie about the case, the threatening letter sent to Connor Green, how he assumed it was related to his bootlegging, and his suspicion of Redstone Stable. The story took longer than I'd wanted, Frankie showing genuine interest by asking many questions. When I finished, he threw me the whiskey sour he'd been stirring. I took a large gulp and gave a sigh as thanks. And on that note, I'm going to take a large gulp of my coffee right here. Thank you for that moment. "Well, Green's case is better than most of what you're given," he said with some enthusiasm. "At least it's not more of that adultery bunk." "Sure," I replied, "but I started with a goal in mind. What's the point of helping a man like Green?" Frankie clicked his tongue on his teeth. "Lawyer or priest, what's it matter? Let me ask you, are the clients you have now the types you want to help?" I refused to admit they weren't. "I like my current clients just fine." "You're always riled up when backed into a corner, Malone. But you don't have to fool me, as long as you're alright fooling yourself." I sighed and stared down at my drink. But my daze was interrupted by the basement door opening then slamming shut. "Who's there?" A small blustering woman began marching toward me. She looked younger than... She was wearing a... Younger than who? Younger than 25, and was a few inches shorter than my 5'6". I thought her grey trench coat was too large for that small frame, which was when I realised. It was exactly like the one that had belonged to Lewis. She hurled insults at me for a while. All I could do was sit and take it until she ran out of gas and started breathing heavily. I set my drink on the bar and looked her in the eyes. I studied her features more thoroughly. It was plain she was a knockout, now that she'd been finished shrieking. Beyond the latest blush and lipstick, she had the natural soft skin and bright eyes perpetually desired by the opposite sex. While I was eyeing her, she caught her breath and restarted her tirade. "I'm the wife of that bum who sneaks into your bed," I asked. "The cat?" Let's leave the coat for now because she's the wife of the cat. But humour wasn't her angle, and she launched into another poetic stanza. "And he just left your sty this morning," he finally ended. That was when I gathered she was Connor Green's wife. Of course, okay. "Mrs. Green, I'm a PI, not a homewrecker, and I don't think your husband in his line of business would want to bed a dick anyhow." They keep going with this double entendre. Dick is old-fashioned slang for a detective, I believe. But the double entendre is clearly intentional. Her look was pure incredulity. "A woman in that line of work?" she questioned. "I don't believe it." I don't know if I need to prove anything to this woman, but I may as well. Why not? Connor Green had just given me a case. Right, of course, so it's this whole thing again. Should I show her Green's letter? I mean... that'll prove it. I told her about why Connor had come to me, the bootlegging and the threats. You see, Mrs. Green, this is what I do. There's not much more I can show to you to prove it. It still took more coaxing for her to believe me, but eventually she came around. She seemed grateful I'd explained it to her. Apparently she had seen her husband leave my apartment, and distraught, she had followed me all the way to Frankie's basement and decided to confront me. I suppose I lost my head after what I thought I'd seen, she said, and she began to cry. Frankie, ever chivalrous to a dimpled girl, only dimpled girls, came around the bar and held her up. Now that's all right, Mrs. Green. Why don't I hail you a cab and send you on back home? She agreed, and they walked together up the stairs. When Frankie returned, I said to him, "You turned knight real quick." He snorted a laugh. "Oh hell, we can't have that siren in here. With a torture yelling like that, every street bugger would have come to her rescue." Mrs. Green is a torch singer? Well, I learned she was Mrs. Connor Green just now when she came in here. I'd only seen her as Lil Fanny, singing lead for the jazz band at the Tin Spoon. The Tin Spoon, I said. Tiny Paul's joint? That's where Green is selling his liquor. Say, you think that's where she met her husband? I laughed. You're a real sleuth, Frankie. He made a sarcastic bow. I shook my head. You're telling me you escorted our little torture out just to avoid a bit of hot water? Frankie flushed and said, "What are you talking about, Malone?" I was never good with emotions, but it was plain that Frankie had instantly fallen for the girl. So what if I had more to squeeze out of her? I asked. What more could you possibly want from Lil Fanny? She can't have anything to do with Green's mess. Contradict or don't? I don't know if I have anything to support that. Let's have a look. Notebook, newspaper. I don't know. Statements. I haven't been looking at that. Connor Green got a threatening letter, has a bootlegging scheme, suspects Redstone stable, following her husband. Well, she's been following him. She might know something. Mrs. Green followed her husband to my place, I asked. Why would... I said. That wasn't a question. Mrs. Green followed her husband to my place, I said. Why would she do that? Frankie rolled his eyes. PC, if you were Green's wife, would you trust him with anything? I'm sure he's always up to something. I shrugged and stood up from the bar stool. What had just happened was quite the ruckus. It seemed like my cue to move along. Can I have a drink first? I grabbed the wine bottle in the bar and examined its label. It featured a picture of grapes and the words, "Sacramental use only." Frankie looked at me with a spark in his eye. "Go ahead," he said. "Give it a swig." "Why not?" I grabbed the half-empty glass that had been next to the bottle and swirled some of its contents between my gums. "A bit spicy, ain't it?" Frankie asked. "It's good," I nodded. I shook my head too much. Is there such thing as bad wine? I know there is. It's good, I nodded and gulped the rest down. It'll cost you too, he said, with a smile, and he grabbed the bottle from me, turning it through his hands. Rabbis charge more than a nickel for this beauty. Only this type of Napa wine is made from that Zinfandel grape. It has a unique aroma. I'd been trying to learn more about wine. Seemed everyone knew their stuff but me. I noted what Frankie had said about the origin of the grape as he sat the bottle back on the bar. You don't even drink. Since when do you know grapes? You don't even drink, I chided. Frankie let out a bellied laugh. I can still enjoy the smell, he said. There was a story behind his teetotaling, but he'd cut short any talk about it. An odd relationship with the drink for a barman. Frankie sighed. Too bad more folks can't know about it. That women's league is the devil. The women's Christian temperance. Aren't you done with the sauce? The Women's Christian Temperance Union was now under feminist Frances Willard, a positive force for the suffrage of women, but her staunch support of prohibition, along with the union's massive political clout, irked the very wet San Franciscan public, and she particularly wasn't popular with bartenders. I turned back to Frankie. Ask about notes. What notes? Green's letter? I wondered aloud how I could get more dirt on Green's bootlegging. Frankie thought about it too. He offered, "Well, Green's working with Tiny Paul on this scheme. If I were to buy it from a new source, I'd have to try it to get a taster." I continued his thought. "So there's likely a sample of Green stuff lying around the tin spoon. That would make sense. Maybe I can talk to Paul about whatever booze I find in there." Frankie nodded. I thanked him for the advice. What? What does that have to do with the case at all? And so much for getting up to leave. Never mind. I turned back to Frankie. "Never mind," I said, and swiveled my seat away from the bar. Anything else here to look at? What's this one? Frankie had a bond with that old shaker at the end of the bar. I was surprised he hadn't named it. He could sling a mean drink, though he'd only use the good liquor if he liked you. Frankie liked me. That's probably it down here, isn't it? Yep. Let's go back up the stairs. The worn stairs led to the outside world. I was heading up the stairs when Frankie called after me. "So what are you going to do?" I'd been thinking about little Fanny, about my sister. That's interesting. What could her sister possibly have to do with anything? But we need to figure out how she got Lewis's coat. I'd been thinking about Lil Fanny. I supposed even mobsters had people who cared about them, and she'd been wearing Lewis's old jacket, so perhaps Green and Lewis had been closer than I'd realized. "I guess I'll take Connor Green's bait," I replied. "I've got nothing better on the stove, and he might need the help. Something still stinks, though." "Well, what's your plan?" Frankie asked. "The way I see it, I have 3 goals right now. Green hired me for a job. Find the guy who wrote the letter. That's the basic part." "But you want more?" asked Frankie. I nodded. "Green's a shady character. I have to learn about him. Who is this guy? Dig into his past. I can't go back to him blind. And then there's something about his bootlegging. How'd Green get a connection like that? What's his source exactly? Squeezing that lemon might give me more juice." "That sounds all right," he replied. "So where is it you're off to?" "I've got 3 leads. That bootlegger Stable, who Green claims sent him the letter. The Tin Spoon Lounge, where I might learn more about Green's rum-running schemes. And Mrs. Green, who could give me more dirt on her husband." Frankie nodded his approval. "Well, if you're ever stuck, come back and see me. You can never solve anything without talking it over." I smiled and went up the stairs. Excuse me. I was debating where to go next. Southern Coffee, Stable's Barbershop, Tin Spoon Lounge, Green's house. Let's check out Stable first. Green had suspected Redstone Stable of sending him that letter. Apparently Stable owned a barbershop in the financial district. I figured there would be no harm in asking Stable about it directly. Would there? What are our other options? Shouldn't we be a little more subtle about questioning people? Tin Spoon Lounge. Tin Spoon Lounge was a speakeasy in North Beach run by Tiny Paul, the gangster that Green had put in with. I'd never been there. The mob keeps a tight lip on their own houses, but I figured it would be a good place to chase Green's bootlegging story. Probably. But what about Green's house? So Green's house might contain more clues about his past, or some reason a threatening letter would come his way. If I got lucky, Mrs. Green would be there to pump with more questions. I'm gonna go to Tin Spoon Lounge. Yes. Off we we go in our adorable little 1920s car. I entered a taxicab driven by an old man with a moustache. He turned to me with eyes that had a playful glint. "Sorry," he said in a rough voice. "This is the end of the demo. I can't take you any further." I didn't know exactly what he meant, but something in that gaze made me understand. Smooth, Debs, I like it. "Now, if you'll keep your eye out for a full release, that'd be swell," he continued. "But for now, please exit to the main menu." I nodded and went my way. Okay, so that's it. That was a lot of fun. I really liked that. The graphics are just amazing. Like, beautiful. And really clever. Just the way they transition and everything. The music's great. And the story's really good so far. Thanks for watching, everyone. I hope you enjoyed this playthrough. Subscribe if you would like to see more. When this comes out on the 8th of February, I'll hopefully be able to play the rest of it. And yeah, have a great day, everyone. Bye now.